Dallas City Hall, also known as the Dallas Municipal Complex, consisted of two buildings in 1963. The old City Hall, built in 1914, is where Oswald was detained on its uppermost fifth floor and was moved around the building for interrogations and witness parades on the weekend of November 22nd. The Annex Building was built next to Old City Hall in 1956 to keep up with the city's demand for more courtroom space. Both were connected above ground with lockable corridors and below ground by a basement car park that was accessed via elevators and a stairwell. The basement car park's entry was down a ramp from Main Street, and its exit was up another ramp to Commerce Street. It was from the basement car park that Lee Oswald's transfer to the county jail would embark from. Up on the third floor of City Hall, after Chief Curry's first phone call that day with Sheriff Bill Decker, he, his deputies, Charles Batchelor and M.W. Stevenson, discussed how Oswald would be transferred to the county jail. Apparently having discussed the threat received to Oswald's life by a group attack, yet without a definitive time and route to move Oswald on, all agreed that using an armored truck would be the best option. Batchelor was tasked with arranging this, so he called the Armored Motorcar Services and spoke with the company's general operations manager, Harold J. Fleming. According to his testimony to the Warren Commission, Fleming arranged for two of the company's drivers, Don Goen and Edward C. Dietrich, to meet he and operations manager Marvin Burt Hall at the company's terminal. Once there, Fleming contacted Batchelor back to say they would be arriving shortly. He also stated that he told Batchelor not to give him dimensions for the ramp, as he already knew the truck that the police wanted would be too large to fit down it. Fleming and Hall decided on taking two trucks, a larger one, number 46, that Batchelor indicated as required, and a smaller one as a backup because 46 had just had a new battery installed, and they actually had to jump start it in the company's garage earlier that same morning. While Batchelor was arranging the transportation, Captain Cecil Talbert took the initiative by instructing one of his lieutenants, Rio Pierce, to call in the officers of 3 patrol squads and report to the basement for assignment. Talbert then caught up with Stevenson and Captain George L. Lumpkin over coffee in the lunchroom of the second floor and discussed the transfer with them, particularly which way through Dallas they thought Oswald would be taken along to the county jail. Having speculated on the most likely route, Talbert conveyed this information to Sergeants Putnam and Dean, as they were who he delegated responsibility of security arrangements in the basement to. Between 9 a.m. and 9:15 a.m., enough police personnel consisting mainly of reserves had gathered in the basement and were ready for their next instructions. But before the basement could be searched, it had to be sealed. In order to do this, all non-police personnel in the basement were supposedly asked to leave, including media and civilian workers. However, contrary to widely held opinion, those in the media were not told or asked to leave. While it's true that most media personnel were concentrated on the third floor to follow any developments of Oswald's transfer that morning, according to his statement to the FBI, Stephen Alexander, a videographer on assignment for NBC, was in the basement at the time of the search and was never asked to leave. He said that he observed several officers searching the basement, including looking in the trunks of parked cars and the air conditioning grills in the hallways. He said that he even asked one of the officers why they were doing it. He said he was told that it was because the police had received threats on Oswald's life. Adding further weight to his claims is the fact that he referenced several City Hall workers being moved out of the basement by police officers and the 2 elevators up to the Annex Building being sealed, which did happen. Throughout this whole time, Alexander said that no part of the basement was closed off, and there is nowhere in his statement that indicates that he was ever asked to leave either. United Press International reporter Henry Rabun arrived at City Hall at 7 a.m. and, like Alexander, he was not asked to show any identification or credentials. Rabun testified to the FBI that he sat in the jail office for most of the morning and wait. He said he would go up to and return from the third floor every now and then to gather any updates or developments regarding Oswald's transfer. Nowhere in his statement was it mentioned his not being allowed back in the jail office or that there was a sealed search of the basement taking place. Other than Alexander and Robin, no other member of the media made any reference to the search of the basement taking place. The closest, perhaps, was Robert Huffaker, who referred to seeing cars being searched that morning in his statement to the FBI. However, it turns out that there were very few references in any DPD personnel statements regarding the basement search and it being sealed beforehand. In terms of clearing people out prior to the search, according to his statement to the DPD, Lieutenant Pierce instructed Sergeant Patrick T. Dean to remove all unauthorized people from the basement until it had been searched. In his statement to the FBI, Pierce made a similar inference when he said all civilian employees were removed from the basement, and it was Pierce's superior, Captain Talbert's understanding that all personnel other than regular and reserve officers would be cleared out according to his statement for the DPD investigation. If Alexander's claims are to be believed, only the City Hall workers were cleared out, but not any members of the media. Why? Did the ever media-conscious DPD want their efforts of searching the basement to be seen and reported? Likely so. Conveniently for the DPD, the ambiguity of who was a civilian and who was not seems to have enabled the story to germinate that the basement was secured prior to a full search being carried out when it was not. So in the immediate wake of Lee Oswald's shooting, at least it would be known that the DPD did carry out their due diligence. Regardless, before the search began, Sergeant Dean and Putnam did assign some regular and reserve personnel to guard the basement. Given the most likely points that people could enter, the basement were down the Commerce Street and Main Street ramps, as well as down the corridor from the lesser referred to Harwood Street entrance. Officers Bobby G. Patterson, Vaughn, and Ronald C. Nelson were instructed to not let anyone pass them that were not police or press, and even then, members of the press would need to produce credentials. Reserve officers, Worley and Brock, were assigned to the outside of the stairwell and elevators respectively on the eastern side of the basement car park, in addition to the Annex Building above apparently being closed off to the public. For the remainder of the basement search, Dean oversaw a group of mostly reserve officers, as many as 30 as stated in some testimonies, searching the basement from top to bottom. According to those involved in the search, all parked cars were examined, including under their hoods and in their trucks. Crevices across the ceiling, including air ducts, were searched, as well as around any air conditioning systems on the ground, which lines up with Stephen Alexander's observations. The only thing that the search turned up were a couple of rifles in some of the parked cars that belonged to police personnel. These were removed by officers and taken away for safekeeping. As time came closer to 10 a.m., when Chief Curry said Oswald would be transferred, members of the public began to gather outside the Commerce Street ramp exit, waiting to catch a glimpse of Oswald, however, and whenever he would emerge. This necessitated patrol officers D.L. Pate, Leonard E. Jez, R.A. Watkins, L.C. Taylor, and most of the reserve officers who did not participate in the searching of the basement, being assigned to help with keeping the crowds across the street from the ramp. In contrast, leading all the way up to the time of the shooting, only Officer Roy Vaughn would be at the Main Street ramp entry to guard it. And to be fair in this regard, there were minimal bystanders there presumably, as it was common knowledge that all vehicles leaving the City Hall basement only did so up the Commerce Street ramp. With the search of the basement car park completed thoroughly by all accounts, Dean called together all patrol officers that had since arrived for a briefing of assignments at some time just after 10:45 a.m. and assigned them along the presumed transfer route. D.K. Irwin, Commerce and Pearl; T.R. Burton, Commerce and Central Expressway, now Cesar Chavez Boulevard; Thomas R. Gregory, Central Expressway in Maine; Gerald L. Tolbert, Elm and Pearl; L.L. Fox, Elm and Harwood; Marvin L. Wise, Elm and St. Paul; Jerry Raz, Elm and Stone; Warren E. Hibbs, Elm and Accard; Kenneth K. Anderson, Elm and Field; Emmy Ferris, Elm and Lamar; and Don Francis Steele, Elm and Houston. Because the county jail was situated on Houston Street and its close proximity to Dealey Plaza, where many members of the public were gathering at the site of President Kennedy's assassination, this meant Officer Steele would be joined by additional personnel, including Reserve Officer J.C. Hunt and Captains H.L. Hatley and R.H. Lunday, to keep crowds at bay for Oswald's arrival. This accounts for where most of the patrol officers were just before and during Oswald's shooting. Their instructions were to stop the traffic at their given intersection as the convoy transporting Oswald approached. After the convoy passed through, they would fall in behind it on their motorcycles to escort it the rest of the way to the county jail. However, when reports of Oswald's shooting emerged, officers along the route were alerted to it either over the police dispatch or by members of the public. They were then all summoned to Parkland Hospital to assist with security there. As has already been demonstrated, in the basement, there were ramps from street level that led into the car park, at elevators and stair access up into the Annex Building. Also on the basement level of the City Hall complex was a first aid office, the jail office from where Oswald was brought through and emerged from prior to being shot, telephone booths and utility spaces such as a janitor's closet and meter room. However, there was also the assembly room, which across that weekend was where Oswald participated in lineups for witnesses, was where he was brought before the press conference, and where reserve officers were assigned from ahead of his planned transfer. Adjacent to the assembly room was the records room. Unfortunately, it is hard to be precise about where exactly the assembly and records rooms were situated, as there is no record to be found of the layout of that part of the building. The basement also extended to under the sidewalks of Main and Commerce streets, and it was under each street that were doors to access the sub-basement. Essentially a level below the basement, the sub-basement was part of the building's original construction in 1914, so it spanned under City Hall and the basement car park. Across it were engine rooms, a locker room, and apparently at one stage, without any irony intended, a shooting range. Aside from the doors under the Commerce and Main Street sidewalk, there were other ways to access the sub-basement. For instance, there was a service elevator that ran from the top of the Annex Building all the way down to the sub-basement. On the back of it was another door which opened out to a set of fire escape stairs. And on the first floor, there was a corridor that led to an outer door which opened out to a vacant lot. This enabled service workers to have access to the building and its service elevator from the outside without having to walk all the way through the main entry. On the morning of the shooting, the service elevator would be left locked on the first floor from 10 a.m., and the two general-purpose elevators adjacent to the service elevator had already had their power cut to ensure they too could not be used that morning. Still in the sub-basement level but under the City Hall building was a locker room. It was accessible by a stairway down from the hallway that intersected the assembly room and records room on the above basement level, a large space which accommodated lockers for personnel. Across it was a television, 4 payphones, a bathroom, recreation room, and vending machines to purchase food, drink, cigarettes, and cigars. Like the rest of the sub-basement level, there is also no record of the locker room being searched and sealed either. However, it could be accessed from Commerce Street down a flight of steps next to the stairway going up to the building entrance. This was for a functional purpose to allow personnel ease of access when starting or finishing their shifts. While it was true that all entrances at the top of the steps from street level were locked, there were instances of people being able to walk down the side steps of the Harwood Street entrance without being checked and get all the way down to the jail office in the time leading up to Oswald's shooting. More on that later. Moving back up to the basement car park, let us focus on the stairwell that led from there to the Annex Building. We've already touched on how a fire escape could be accessed through the back of the service elevator. However, there is no evidence that this point or any other point of the stairwell was guarded or locked so as to prevent people entering or exiting through this way either. The stairwell was an emergency exit for the Annex Building, which meant its door could not be locked on the inside so as to allow people to flee in the event of an emergency. On the basement side, however, this door was lockable. Recall as well, the 2 reserve officers, Brock and Worley, were standing guard, so it was secure from anyone being able to access the basement down from the Annex Building at this point. As already mentioned, also up in the Annex Building, there were corridors that linked it to the Municipal/Old City Hall building. At the points where the 2 buildings joined, there was a lockable gate. However, Captain Stevenson testified that he did not know if the first floor gate was locked that morning, and there is no record of any other officers in the building to ensure the elevators and stairwell were not breached. At least City Hall maintenance worker, Edward Pierce, testified that the gate that Stevenson was referring to was locked. But this does not alter the fact that the Annex Building was not fully sealed and guarded to prevent the stairway and elevators from becoming used that morning. So contrary to the findings of the Dallas PD and Warren Commission, all possible points of exit and entry were not guarded, therefore secured that morning, so we are presented with the conclusion that there was only the most minimal of security perimeters set up that encompassed the immediate area that Oswald's transfer took place within. Was this good old Dallas police incompetence or something else?